Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics, and in this video I'd like to discuss the announcement that there is to be another national grooming gangs inquiry in England and Wales. Reform UK, of course, loudly called for one at the start of the year. So is this just a case of Starmer trying to take the sting out of another Reform attack line? No, the decision is actually the result of an independent review, but of course Farage will want to take full advantage. But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button so you stay notified. So Farage will be claiming that he pressured Starmer into doing this, won't he, after the Prime Minister said there was no need for another inquiry. If there's going to be any amusement from this, it may well be that it creates another spat between Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe, because Nigel Farage dropped the issue very quickly and Rupert Lowe did not. We will see. But there had already been a very long inquiry, which the Conservatives ordered, but did not implement the recommendations. Oh, they didn't talk about that back in January, but there had been a 7-year-long inquiry, and the recommendations were still to be implemented. Labour had said they would be implementing those recommendations, but the issue became a political football back in January when Jess Phillips, the safeguarding minister, and one of a handful of MPs who has proven track record in tackling the abuse of women and young girls, was asked by Oldham Council to set up a commission to investigate their grooming gangs problem. Now, as well as a national inquiry, which took place a while ago, we are also having local ones to deal with specific local issues in some of the gangs. Phillips, however, said that Oldham should just commission their own review. Now, that caught the attention of Elon Musk, who was best buds with both Trump and Farage at the time. How times change. And Space Karen decided to attack both Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer over grooming gangs. He tried to claim that the government were refusing to allow an investigation and they were covering up abuse. This was, of course, a lie. The government was simply making the case that a local investigation should be ordered by the local authorities. But Musk, either because he didn't understand the issues or didn't care and just wanted to push his racist culture wars, attacked Phillips and encouraged such hatred towards her, she became a potential target for violence herself. Which is who the likes of Musk and Farage really are, isn't it? They pretend to care about violence against women and then deliberately and maliciously engineer the conditions for violence against a woman, Jess Phillips in this case. This would be the same Jess Phillips who spent most of her life before entering Parliament working to protect women and young girls from abuse and then continued to do so in Parliament. And Keir Starmer, remember, the prosecutor who actually blew the lid on the grooming gangs scandal in the first place. Two people who do not need any moral lectures from a man who thinks so little of women as people that he wants to hire their wombs out like an Airbnb. Then, because Musk had picked up a thread, Farage followed it, seeing the potential to score political points. Farage and then Reform UK MP, or the former Reform UK MP, Rupert Lowe, led the calls for another inquiry. Starmer and Yvette Cooper, the Home Secretary, had said, look, there's already been a national inquiry. It took 7 years. We're implementing the recommendations that the Tories couldn't be asked to do. And also, there were regional inquiries to deal with the uniquely local issues that had been taking place in some areas, and they were still ongoing. Starmer had said that the victims wanted action, not more delays. And when Kemi Badenoch decided to jump on the bandwagon, it transpired she had not actually spoken to any victims of the abuse, and she said she had no intention of doing so. No, she was going to represent victims apparently without ever talking to one. Now, it's important to remember that, because Kemi Badenoch is now saying that Starmer doesn't know what he thinks until an official report tells him, as if the Prime Minister should act on instinct and like, reports, expert reports, why would I want that? But that is how a government should behave. What is the point of conducting reviews and inquiries if you're going to ignore the findings and just act on your own prejudices and limited information? So it's important to cross-reference what Badenoch is saying today with the fact that she started blathering on last January, aping Farage's lines, who was aping Musk's, when she had not met a single victim and said she wasn't going to either. However, the government did announce a review of the whole process to be led by Louise Casey, who's a Conservative peer with experience of reviews like this. So the government had accepted, because the narrative now will be, oh, Keir Starmer desperately didn't want another inquiry. No, because they ordered a review to see if there should be one. So the government had accepted that maybe another inquiry might be needed, because otherwise, why would you have launched the review? The review has now been concluded, and it was announced yesterday that it is recommending a further national inquiry. Almost immediately, the Prime Minister said, look, once he'd read it, he said, I've read it. yes, we're going to do this. In other words, the inquiry has been requested by an independent review. The government have accepted the recommendations. Early on in the review process, Casey was of the belief that another inquiry wouldn't be necessary. So Starmer echoed those words. Based on the evidence presented now, the view has changed. Starmer has just backed the independent review with what it's been asking for. The government had also provided funding for more localised regional inquiries, which the Conservatives in government didn't seem to bother with. Almost like things aren't a problem until they're in opposition. So it's not part of any blue Labour nonsense this time, nor has it got anything to do with Nigel Farage, who, as I said, dropped the issue as soon as it wasn't attracting headlines like he always does. He hasn't talked about it for ages. Rupert Lowe has continued on with his own gimmick in order to try and build his profile after Elon Musk expressed approval for him after deciding Farage wasn't fit to lead. So that's the situation. The politics is, of course, less simple. Reform UK will want to claim that they are leading and Labour are following. The Conservatives try to argue that they have called for another national inquiry for some time, where witnesses would be compelled to give evidence. But in case people had forgotten, they were in power less than a year ago. They did order their own 7-year-long inquiry, and they didn't implement any recommendations. So the question might reasonably be asked, why didn't they deal with all this when they were in government instead of just paying lip service to it with a 7-year-long inquiry that they then filed away and did nothing with? And if Reform UK want to get chippy about it, because but we would have done in government, we would have done. Oh yeah, so why didn't they bother with the issue until it was generating headlines? Personally, I remain worried that it means either the review will end up taking a very long time to report again, or that the current victims will be let down due to a lack of progress on implementing improvements. See, I suggested this back in January. I'll repeat it here. Consider a couple of things. So, the recommendations from the previous inquiry, right, and then this new inquiry. So, do you carry on implementing the recommendations from the last inquiry? If the answer is yes, then what that means is you're changing the landscape because you're implementing changes which should make it, should reduce the number of victims in future, right? So if you are then carrying out an investigation at the same time as these changes are coming online, then that means what you're investigating in the early part of your inquiry, the evidence is all wasted a year later because things have changed, right? So I worry there's a risk that the initial evidence gathered becomes out of date as rules and procedures are changed in parallel with the inquiry. Now, if you don't continue to implement the recommendations, then that means maybe another 7 years waiting for the new inquiry to report back before anything is done to protect current and future victims. Now, I'm happy to say that the review was independent, so no one can argue that a Conservative peer would be doing anything to help a Labour government win political points. But I do still worry we're either going to make the new inquiry inefficient with changing situations or delay improvements. Now, it may not be that. There might be a third way. Starmer has said, due to the technical aspects of it, it will take some time for the inquiry to set up. So it's not going to start reporting next week. I mean, inquiries do take time anyway. So it might well be that this implementation of the previous recommendations is going to go at pace, and then the new inquiry will happen once that has occurred. Maybe you get the best of both worlds then. But, what I would say is, I would ask the Conservatives this. I would also ask Reform UK as well. I would just want them to say to me, what was wrong with the last inquiry? If it genuinely was inadequate, despite the fact it took 7 years, then perhaps the Conservatives should be asked why they asked it up in the first place. And while Starmer is at it, maybe ask Farage why he said nothing about the original inquiry at the time. Why was he only interested when Musk, who knows nothing about anything, suddenly decided to say something about it while he was paying someone to boost his Path of Exile 2 character? But I have a secondary worry about the issue as well, and it is that Labour will cock up the messaging yet again. The situation is this. Labour announced they would implement the recommendations of a 7-year-long national inquiry, which the Conservatives have just sat on. They also announced an independent review to see if more needed to be done. They also funded regional inquiries to tackle local issues, right? So what more can you ask them to do? The review that they ordered has now suggested, yes, a new inquiry is needed, and the government have announced that they will action that recommendation. What we have here is Keir Starmer, the first prosecutor to go after grooming gangs, agreeing to implement the recommendations of independent inquiries and reviews into grooming gangs. We have the Conservatives, who were in power less than a year ago, who claim to be outraged by it all now, but did bog all in government, also refusing to meet victims. We also have Reform UK, who didn't give two shits about the inquiry when it reported back, and the Conservatives did nothing about it, but suddenly thought it was super important when a crackhead in America wanted to shitpost about it on Twitter. And then the same Reform UK dropped the issue just as quickly. But let me know what you think in the comments below, and for more content you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.